Sure. Welcome to our colleagues and friends here in the CAARI Library and online, and thank you for joining us for our lecture series. I'm Lindy Crew, CAARI's director, and it's my pleasure this evening to introduce our two speakers, Dr. Kristina Winther-Jacobsen of the Saxo Institute of the University of Copenhagen, and Dr. Angus Graham of Uppsala University, co-directors of the project we will hear about this evening. First, I will tell you a little bit about Dr. Winther-Jacobsen. Kristina was awarded her PhD at the University of Cambridge in 2008, published in 2010 as From Pots to People, a ceramic approach to the archaeological interpretation of plough soil assemblages in late Roman Cyprus. She has held a number of postdoctoral positions at the University of Aarhus and the National Museum of Denmark, and since 2009 has been lecturer and later associate professor in classics at the University of Copenhagen, with time taken out to serve as director of the Danish Institute of Athens from 2015 to 2020. She is an active field worker, participating in a number of excavations and surveys in Cyprus and Greece. Kristina's research interests lie in landscape and mortuary archaeology, as well as Hellenistic and Roman pottery studies, and she has published extensively on these topics. Turning now to Dr. Graham, Angus undertook his doctoral research at the Institute of Archaeology, University College London, on harbours and quays in pharaonic Egypt, an investigation into their location and physical nature, with particular focus on the Nile Valley. We're very good at snappy titles in that. Since 2020, he's held the appointment of Associate Professor in the Department of Archaeology and Ancient History at Uppsala University. And in addition to fieldwork in Cyprus, he's worked extensively in Egypt and is interested in the archaeology of both landscapes and waterscapes, publishing papers on Egyptian harbours and the Nile, palaces and temples, as well as Roman sites on Cyprus. Both our speakers worked on and contributed to the publication of the Troodos Archaeological and Environmental Survey Project, TASP, in the early 2000s, co-directed by Bernard Dapp, with us this evening, Michael Given, Lina Casimidou, and Jane Noller, and it's a project which many of us are familiar with, and perhaps that's how you both met in the first place, indeed. So I would now like to invite Kristina and Angus to present their lecture entitled Creating Narratives for the Roman and Late Roman Copper Production in the Central Northern Troodos. Thank you.
Hello. I've forgotten if it's on. Can you hear me?
I don't think you turned it off.
No, did I? Well, well, there's a number, so it should be on, I think. Okay, good, thank you. And first of all, apologies for challenging the technology, because there are two of us, it's a partnership, so we will both be speaking. So any technical challenges really has to do with our organization of the project. And thank you for the invitation to speak. It's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to be in the majority for once. You know, at home, I'm the one person, well, now there are two of us, but working on Cypriot material culture, but to be here where we're the majority, that's really wonderful. So thank you for the invitation. We've just started our second season, so this is the first week of fieldwork. It's been a bit stressful, so maybe it was a bit optimistic, but it was a chance too good to be missed. So we are in fact very happy to be here. Good. So we wanted to take this opportunity. We've talked on several occasions about and introducing some of the methodologies and what we're hoping to achieve with the methodologies, but we wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the theory and the ideas behind it, but also hopefully a little bit more about the results that we think we're getting. But as I said, it's only our second field season, and we're only starting it, so it's all quite preliminary. I want to start with these two landscape archaeological quotes, because as Lindy says, you know, for both of us, we come from the TASP project. So just to, you know, set the context for the landscape archaeology. So first of all, there's a quotation which mentions all these important things that we think about when we think about landscape archaeology. So settlement decisions, spatial organization, hierarchy of settlement patterns, primary production, and distribution of raw material. All of these things that can be observed and can be quantified. But I also want you to remind you of this wonderful quote, Bernard. You may not need to read it because maybe you remember it. But what we are, in all of this quantification, what is also important is always to remember that it's actually people who go into the landscapes. So it's human activities. It's the understanding the agency of people, but also the agency of landscapes and the mediation between the cultural and the natural landscapes. So this is the context for the decision making, the settlement decision making. That is really what we want to explore. And this is a little bit about the scale. So we were part of TASP, and there were several other Cypriot landscape projects, large scale, intensive, systematic, artifact-based, working across different types of landscapes. On the one hand, the large scale, as I would say, and then there are also the smaller scale, the projects that focus on landscapes that are defined by a specific geographical feature, for instance, a river. So those are sort of the two scales, large scale across landscapes and smaller scale focused on a more cohesive landscape. We have chosen for this specific project what I would call a bottom-up approach, the settlement ecological approach, with a smelting site at the heart of our project. So it's an activity that's at the heart of our project at a specific site. And this site and the activities depend on the resources of the watershed of the Peristerona Valley and the wider landscape around it. But the lower quote here is quite nice. So if you replace agrarian settlement with smelting settlement or even mining settlement, then as you go along this sentence, you will see, so the idea is what we already know of the metal production systems, and we link these to the considerations with the settlement decisions. So that's the bottom-up approach that we are attempting for this project. We're obviously not working in a vacuum. Lots of work has been done. Our specific smelting site is, of course, largely defined by this fantastic slag heap. And there's been lots of work done in Cyprus on slag heaps. This is by no means extensive. Many people have been involved, but we do want to draw your attention to Cookie and Steinberg and their work on collecting the slag heaps and classifying the slag heaps already in the 80s. And then, of course, the work of Lina Kasianidou on metallurgy, but on many different aspects of metallurgy with many different partners. I think the part of Lina's work that we're most influenced by is probably not the metallurgical part, but more the part that has to do with the auxiliary productions, everything that provides the infrastructure, the resources, in fact, to explore the copper resources. So this is where we are, central northern Cyprus, in the foothills of the Troodos mountains on the north side, with these very large copper deposits. Skoulioti, of course, where TASP work, but also further towards Soli, with the great slag heaps on the occupied side. And then down here, further to the east, we have Mitsero and the survey area of Skissop, the Sydney Cyprus survey, and finally we're in the middle. And I think that means, Angus, that you're taking over. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kristina. Can you hear me okay? So you can see here we've got three core objectives, and actually in a few minutes Kristina will present the 8 work packages that actually come together to address these three objectives. Of course, we're interested in this relationship between mining and, as Kristina's already said, this decision making. And we also really want to place it in its economic context as well. And finally, the third part, which is one of the parts that I'm mainly involved in, is actually understanding the policy landscapes. So we're trying to actually understand those of the longue durée, with the idea of understanding what the landscapes looked like before the Roman period and afterwards, and seeing how these Roman period copper production landscapes impacted upon the existing landscape, and then what went on beyond that. Okay, thank you. And as Kristina said, you can see as they're placed between the Cyprus-Sydney Survey Project and the Troodos Archaeological Environmental Survey Project, with Bernard Knapp as the principal investigator of both of these projects. And actually, the nice thing for us is we have if you like, a geographical space in between, but importantly, we're actually building on the context that's been provided by those two projects. So we're working in through the Peristerona River Valley, but we're also going into other parts, particularly of the task landscape that we're working on as well, and actually really extending into some of the research questions, building upon these two projects. Here you can see the slag heap here, facing towards the Troodos Mountains, and as you see, yeah. From this, actually, it lies right in the contact zone between the pillow lavas here in Agia Marina Xyliatou-Mavrovouni, with the conglomerates up there on the left in the geological map. So we've got a mixture of conglomerates and these pillow lavas, where we've got this contact zone where essentially we're getting the copper-bearing ore bodies. And what's really interesting for us is to start to think about the organisation that Kristina's introduced there. Is we have some of the features of this area around the smelting site. So we've got the slag heap there up on the right hand side, and very close by we've got a potential collapse adit, and that provides us with an opportunity to look at comparative small scale sites. Places like Iavavora, Almiras, where again that small site from Cypriot Archaic to Hellenistic period also has the adits or the mining area very, very closely associated with it. We also have a cistern, which is an important part of the infrastructure, and here you'll notice it's actually within 200 meters of the Peristerona River. So it sort of leads to questions: why are they going to make an effort to actually to dig through the bedrock to produce a cistern to store water? And this is actually the work that's been led by Rosa Marçal. Here you can see they just started the work on Monday, starting to do the topographic work before they started doing the cleaning, and assisted by Juan Marin and some other and our colleagues in the team. And importantly, it really allows us to start to think about questions of seasonality. So why do you have a cistern if you've got a river 200 meters away? Well, as we can see today, and we have to be very careful of modern analogies, is that river is dry for many months of the year. It's still dry now, it's November. You can walk across the gravel bed river now. So does it indicate, or at least allow us to ask the question, are they actually doing the smelting activity during that period where the river isn't flowing and they need water for the workforce and also water for part of the processing of the copper ore? So that's what Rosa is hoping to start to reveal by the cleaning work they've done. And importantly for us, actually within the cistern there, you can see in the top right hand corner, we've actually got we've actually got two layers of the hydraulic mortar there, and hopefully we'll get some radiocarbon dates from those that will at least give us an indication of some of the history of the system as well, and how we can tie it into other parts of the smelting operation. A short comparison here between the two sites in the Lagudra Valley on the left there, which was what I was involved in 20 years ago now, working in TASP, and now the work that Kristina's leading in the surface survey on the right-hand side of Peristerona Valley. And we're really trying to contextualise both of these smelting sites by the surface survey and understanding the chronology of the material culture around them, which Kristina will talk a little bit more about in a minute. And here we have the slag heap here in the Lagudra Valley, and importantly, both from various elements such as the size of the slag heaps, the manganese flux, etc. And also importantly here we have radiocarbon dates from the TASP project from the base of the exposed slag heap, which dated to the 5th and the first half of the 6th century of the Common Era. Turning to the Peristerona River Valley, the slag heap here, we actually again have these large slag cakes, indications of manganese flux. And whilst we haven't got any radiocarbon dates from it, the work that Kristina's done with the team has actually shown that we've got late Roman Amphro type 1 fragments that places in the 6th to the mid 7th century AD. And actually, based upon the fact that the radiocarbon dates in Lagudra are at the base, we actually think they're probably contemporaneous smelting operations. And I'll hand back to Kristina.
Yes. So both of these different contexts are sites with relatively small slag heaps, although the one in the Peristerona Valley is probably quite a bit smaller than the Lagudra Valley one, but we're still in the scale of smaller slag heaps. And by typology and the C14 and the pottery with slag, we can date these to the same period of time. So obviously we're interested in the kinds of settlements, the kinds of activities that we can provide evidence for around these slag heaps. And it's always, you know, we have survey results and it's always a point of critique that it's very difficult to compare. So I tried to make a comparison of the type of pottery and the chronological periods that were recorded during the survey in the Lagudra Valley on the left side, and for the survey that we've done in the Peristerona Valley. And what you can see is that at both sites, the pottery extends both before and after the period of the smelting activity. So although the smelting activity makes up a large proportion, larger in Peristerona, but nonetheless, these are sites where activity is on a much longer chronological scale. There's a little text at the bottom about the densities. Now, densities are difficult to compare. We are not following exactly the same methodology in our collection strategy as for the TASP project. But when you look at the densities, you can see the densities. So Hellenistic Roman densities in the TASP area is about 30 sherds per 100 square meters, although we have one specific unit that had extremely high densities, and if you take that out, we end up around 17 sherds per 100 square meters. And if you compare that to the densities in the field just below the slag heap, which has the highest densities, you will see that it's 15 sherds per 100 square meters. So we are in the same range, I would say, but then the densities are not quite as high. The other thing that's slightly different, I mean, so you can see that multiple periods are recorded at both sides, but it seems that at Mavrovouni, earlier periods are more prominent. So there's more material from the Iron Age, from the classical period, and from the Hellenistic and early Roman period. And it's actually the later periods that seem to have less material. But whichever way, it's clear that the evidence for the smelting appears to be concentrated only in the late Roman period. But when the smelting takes place, it takes place at a site where there is activity, at a much longer chronological range, certainly. Yes, that was the right one. So the smelting settlement is in the Peristerona part of a small settlement system. It's not a, there's a very narrow corridor passing through the foothills onto the plain. And then we have this small valley. And you can see it doesn't really have a lot of space that is suitable for agriculture, but it is a small pocket. And in this area with the slag heap in the middle, they seem to be quite equidistant, in fact. Katomoni Pati is the most convincing one. You can see when you look at the pottery densities that, in fact, the way pottery assemblages are quite discrete in this area. So we have large areas with very little, but when there is a site, it is quite discrete. It stands out quite clearly. And we have Katomoni Pati, 800 meters to the south, and then we have, we're calling it Katomoni Xyliatou for the moment, because there's also a Chalcolithic site in this area, but there is at least a Roman settlement as well. This settlement we will be looking at more this year, but in fact, Katomoni Pati, we looked at last year, and one of the interesting things that make us connect Katomoni Pati with the slag heap or the smelting settlement is not only the chronology, the fact that there are people living and working in this place in the late antique period, but also that this is the only place away from the slag heap that we find slag. Not big slag cakes, but we do find, you can see them here, they're easy to see. I took new photos, but summer photos, well, actually it's winter photos, isn't it? They're very dusty, but crushed slag is easier to see in the rain. And in fact, in this landscape, all the slag is densely clustered just around the slag heap. And it doesn't spread out to the fields beyond the slag heap, except for this specific place where we have a scatter of crushed slag. And then we also have tile with slag, like we had slagged pottery at the actual smelting site. So we have, for now, we have at least one tile that is slagged. And the chronological horizon seems very similar. So again, it's a place that people have lived over a long period of time. We have tile. We also found tile at the smelting site. We don't find a lot of tile in this landscape. So we're thinking that although people have been living in this landscape over a long period of times, it's unlikely that these are large settlements. They might be more isolated, smaller settlements, and they might be more intermittent. There's absolutely no evidence for continuity or anything that can be qualified as a land, as a village. I think the clusters of pottery are too small to talk about villages during the Iron Age, Hellenistic and Roman period for certain. Angus mentioned this, so that the backbone of the project is, of course, the exploitation of these rich copper resources, but we're trying to read the development of the exploitation in these cycles of cultural, economic, social developments. So the change from autonomous kingdoms to centralized Cypriot, Cyprus ruled by a foreign power, and the elite gathered in the cities, and the transition from the polytheistic to the monotheistic religions, and finally also the weakening of the Byzantine Empire and the growing influence of the Arab Caliphate. So these are some of the cycles that we're trying to understand the copper production on these waves. Yeah, I suppose that's how I'm going to put it. And in order to do that, we have established 8 work packages that you can see here. Different specialists, different methodologies, but all trying to be tied together to create not necessarily one narrative, but probably, hopefully, multiple narratives, looking at the exploitation of the copper, but also looking at the development of the settlement system in the Peristerona Valley before and after the copper production. Angus?
So actually turning to sort of look beyond the smelting site, one of the important parts of that whole copper production landscape is actually the fuel. And it's something that we're starting to kind of turn our attention to a bit more in the project. And this is actually work that was started with SCISP and really kind of moved forward by the task work of Neil Irwin. And this idea to try and understand how much charcoal was required for the production of copper during the smelting process. And as you can see from this quote from Neil's work, he was talking about 200 donkey trips a day to supply the production of copper at Xyliatou-Mavrovouni. Now, of course, out the sites, the smelting sites that we're looking at are much, much smaller. But importantly, what he was trying to actually think through there was actually, is this deforestation that's often talked about because we've seen it in the ancient literature, or is it actually something that's a bit more managed? And actually that's what Neil was working towards, is really trying to understand whether we've got actually a managed forest landscape as an important resource to continue that work. And actually what we're interested in trying to do is really understand how that was organised a bit more, and if we can actually locate charcoal production areas, and then how they link in to actually build this much larger network that, of course, is centred at the smelting site, but it's going much further beyond, and then obviously after the production of copper, then moving towards the coastline into that other wider network. Lena's work at Xyliatou-Mavrovouni back in the task phase in the early 2000s, actually, as you can see from the table there, clearly showed that Pinus brutia was really, really dominant in terms of the species that was being used with more than 80%. And in fact, actually, she saw the same thing in the small slag heap in the Lagudra Valley, a little bit over 80% as well of Pinus brutia. Was used in the production of charcoal from the samples that were taken from the slag heaps. And sort of turning to the complexity of this issue, so this notion that we've got deforestation, or it's all the fault of the human beings requiring pit crops for their mining, charcoal for their smelting, etc. We start to see that actually there's perhaps a much more greater level of complexity involved in there. And we've sort of taken a couple of pieces of work here, Martin Fenay's work, when he was at Stockholm, now at Uppsala in our department, and looking at this idea of the Roman warm period, and then actually this potential periods of drought actually might have had an impact upon the forest and the forest vegetation. And the same thing going on with Christodoulou's thesis work from 2015, where she was actually pouring right up in the sort of top part of the Troodos mountains, at two sort of peak areas, and she actually sees this change again that she thinks is related to the soil moisture content. So this dryness, we've got to sort of try to unravel a more complex situation with humans and external environmental elements that might be involved during the Roman period. So as part of trying to understand the landscape before and then the impact of the Roman period copper production landscapes and then the landscape afterwards, we've actually been, if you like, looking for paleosols, and then really trying to start to understand what's going on, what changes, what continuities we can see in the landscape. And this work's been led by Messini Eguma from the Cyprus Institute. And we've cut 32 sections and done detailed recording of these profiles. And then we've taken various samples for micromorphology, geochemical analysis, which has been done at the Wiener Lab in Athens. And then the anthropological work has been led by Panagiotis Kalouris in the audience. The phytolith work by Louia Kasapidou and supervised by Evi Margaritis, all at the Cyprus Institute. In the spring this year, Zoran Peric and Amber Hood came out, and we've actually collected 42 OSL samples, and they've just been dated now by Zoran. So we now can have hopefully a chronological framework to place these changing continuities in landscape. But they need to be worked through. So I haven't got the results of those yet for you. To return to trying to understand what's going on, if you like, in forest exploitation further upstream of these river valleys, we carried out a preliminary LiDAR survey in November last year with Ola Risbol and Magna Grant from Trondheim University in these 5 areas you can see on the map, with the idea of we wanted to try and see if we could see anthropogenic features in the landscape that were actually really difficult to see with the foot survey, the surface survey that was done during the task days, because you have very, very thick pine needle covering throughout the Troodos Mountains. So this is the work that's done. You can see right at the top there, at the top of this image, Sinum Church, to give you some context. And all of those yellow dots are the various features that Ola identified through the 2D and 3D software that he used after they'd taken the LiDAR survey. And you can see it's also contextualized by the TP numbers, which is the work done by TASP. So it's nice for us that we actually have this context of this earlier work with the work that we've done. And of course, what we now need to do is try to understand what may or may not have been the reason why these were given an anomaly number or a name here in this case. So we've been out to ground truth these. And here you can see Panagiotis Kalouris and myself, we've been out in this area over the last few days, looking at these various features in the landscape. And they're often rather small cut depressions. And sometimes they're cut into bedrock. We can see exposed bedrock, possibly exploratory. Are they extracting something? They're very, very small in all of the cases you see on the image there in the top right corner. And really the next stage for us is to really understand why they're doing it. And what we're going to do is try and contact and work with the Museum of Forestry up at Cambos and see if we can get some insights from their understanding of the activities that go on, and see at some point whether we can understand what a charcoal production area looks like. Does it have an archaeological signature that we can find?
Yes. I think I'm going to go straight on to this one. So obviously, a small smelting site in an area that has other small Roman sites needs to be connected to the outside world. And Tønnes Nielsen was with us last year to try and identify the infrastructure, the Roman roads that would allow transport of the copper outside of the valley. Oh, sorry, it seems we have two slides of the same one, so maybe it's just like, yes. We have talked about this before, but I do want to take this occasion again in order to demonstrate this conservatism of the Peristerona Valley in a sense. So we worked especially on the river crossing. So you have the Roman, this is the main Roman road that goes around the Troodos mountains in the Roman period, and Tønnes has been able to identify it at several points, but of course it needs to cross the Peristerona River. And as it crosses the floodplain, we can't really do anything. I'm aware that only some people will be able to see what I'm going to do now, but I will go and point. So at least it's an aid for those of you in the room. So the yellow line is the Roman road coming down from, so that's going towards Soli, and you just see the next bit of it up here, that's as it continues on to Tamassos. So here it comes into the floodplain, and we can't obviously tell where it crosses the river, but we do think we have a pretty good candidate, because you can see the two pink dots are actually two chalcolithic sites located just on either side of the river at this point, where the river channel is quite deep and quite narrow. So at the bottom, well, sorry, there you, and it's up here, it's Monarca, and over here we have, I can't remember the name, what's it called? It's called Urunta Stavros Tukurti. So we think that this is probably also the area where the Roman road crossed the river, but the fact that we have chalcolithic sites on either side of the river at this point suggests that just as actually the settlement system in the Peristerona Valley seems to be quite old, the river crossing as well is also quite old. And that brings us on to the settlement hierarchy. Now, in the past, I've tried to understand the, more specifically, the late Roman settlement hierarchy that was recorded by Tass. So it's partly the Cargotis, but actually mostly the Ligudra Valley and the plains. And one of the discoveries was, of course, that there are no urban centers in this area of the hinterland, but the urban center of this area is Soli. And we want, of course, to build, that doesn't come up. Wait, maybe it will. We want to try and build on this settlement system. So here you see the TASP area on the left, on the right, sorry, and Skissop, the Sydney Cyprus survey area on the left, and all the little dots are the Roman settlements, not late Roman, but Roman settlements. And our settlement area is in the middle. And yes, so this is sort of just in order to give you a sense of the network. But one of the challenging things about studying, I think, the settlement hierarchy in this area is, of course, that we don't seem to have any Tamassos, a market town. It's not a large urban center. The only really urban environment seems to be Soli. That's the closest urban environment. But then, of course, Frini, Agia Christophe, who's with us, has excavated this wonderful, luxurious Roman villa at Akaki. And we have nothing in the TASP area, nothing in the Skissop area that comes remotely near to the luxurious villa at Akaki. So clearly, the settlement system that is in the foothills seems to be operating by different standards, but as it comes into the Morpho Bay, it meets a different settlement system. Let me just see. We'll skip that one because we're running a little behind time. Luckily, there are other data sets to explore in order to try and understand the settlement system. This is Lisandro and Agabito's map of the Hellenistic and Roman necropolis in Cyprus. And there you can see quite clearly that the Morphu Bay is an area of intense Hellenistic and Roman activity. And we're sort of down here where it's a little bit more empty. So I think that it's quite clear that there are two very different settlement systems abutting each other here. And this one, what do we want? Yes, the evidence that links the hinterland of certainly TASP and also LAF, what we're doing at the moment. Obviously, there's geographical proximity, but there is in fact other, there's archaeological evidence for a close network with Soli, a close connection with Soli. The written sources, the fact that the mines of all the mines of Soli, there's epigraphal evidence that the Bishop John from Soli had connections and financed projects in the Cargotis Valley. And then we have our own personal amphora style that is specifically associated with the Scoliosis mine, but it's also an amphora type that exists in this hinterland, and it really isn't found outside of Soli and the Morphu Bay and this central northern Troodos hinterland. So there's quite a bit of evidence for the link between Soli and the hinterland. But the research of Tønnesbæk and Nielsen actually brought a new aspect into our thinking of the settlement hierarchy, because he has identified a road that goes straight out of the valley and that seems to continue beyond Peristerona. Of course, the issue is that we can't do any studies beyond Peristerona, but it seems it's possible that it links up with the road to Lapithos. So Lapithos is sort of a new factor for us. Why is it important to have a connection with Lapithos? And Tønnes has been looking at that, and so the Lapithos, the important evidence for the importance of Lapithos is as part of a regional capital defined in the Hellenistic period as administrative centers to the Hellenistic administration, and Lapithos continues in this capacity during the Roman period. We're not quite sure what kind of archaeological evidence to use in order to explore this aspect. We certainly don't really have a pottery to do it at the moment. But Lapithos continues to be the distribution of the imperial portraits shows that Lapithos continues to be an important Roman town in Cyprus, and also the distribution of early Byzantine lead seals. So Lapithos is a new factor for us. We're not quite sure. It is obvious that you can separate administration from trade, emporial, shipping, harbor, but Lapithos is somewhere that we need to factor in, certainly. Finally, just 2 words about workforce, because there's always the question, so who did the actual work? And of course, Galen describes how it was mines, how the mines of Soli they were worked by slaves, and he describes the horrible conditions. And it's several Christian sources also mention how Christians were condemned to mines. There are no actual evidence. They don't specifically mention Christians being sent to Cyprus, but there is this the source from 3010 that mentioned that because of a rebellion in some Palestinian mines, the slaves were dispersed and some of them were sent to Cyprus. The problem is, what do we look for? So we would really like to know more about the workforce, but it's very difficult to distinguish slaves in the archaeological record. Obviously, there is also a difference between working enormous mines where we must imagine hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people, and these smaller productions that we have in the hinterland. But it's something that in fact, in Denmark at the moment, Matthew Larsen has a project on incarceration and the role of sending Christians to work in the mines as a punishment. So we hope that this is something that we can explore, but we're looking for what's the archaeological evidence for the presence of slaves. Yeah. And was that me or you? That's me. So finally, literature on the Roman economy consistently speaks about the drop of the copper production in the 2nd century when the production stops in Spain. And this is a quote from Andrew Wilson. And he mentioned this, that so when the production stops in Spain, the hypothesis is that it moves to Cyprus and to Jordan. And the evidence from the small slag heaps certainly indicate that there is mining in late antiquity. So these are the C14 dates we showed you before. And of course, there's the ceramic evidence. And of course, this ties in really well with the Linas work from Skoriotissa, which shows that the late antique period is the period of the largest production. But of course, the issue with the mining production is that all the modern mines are highly destructive. So it's very, the evidence from the earlier periods have been destroyed. But I think the archaeological evidence from Cyprus certainly indicates that after the production stopped in Spain, there's no doubt that there was a very extensive copper production in Cyprus, both in the large scale mines, but also in the myriads, I would actually say, of small mining settlements, small smelting settlements, like the Agia Marina Xyliatou-Mavrovouni settlement. And hopefully, by the time we have finished our field work, we will be able to explore more of these questions and try to both understand the conditions and the settlement, the decision making, really, the organization of the production, the resources at our small smelting site, and tie it into the Morpho Bay settlement system, the settlement hierarchy, and hopefully maybe connected with the outside world through Soli, and look more closely at the evidence for the importance of the Cypriot copper production in this later Roman economy. Is that all from us?
Yeah.
I think it is. Thank you so much for your
Thank you both so much. That was super interesting. I'm going to stop recording.